Hello cruel world, my name is Dr. 𝐏𝐬𝐲𝐡 𝐅𝐸𝐬𝐲𝐝. I'm a consultant forensic psychiatrist and I live and work in London. This is my channel, A Psych for Sore Minds. So I have to tell you about the case of Lisa Montgomery, who brutally murdered a victim named Bobbie Stinnet, who was 8 months pregnant at the time, and the perpetrator even cut out her baby, stole it and pretended it was hers. So this is obviously a really shocking case, not just because of the criminal index offence that I described, but also when you look into the background of the perpetrator, Lisa Montgomery. So this all happened in Missouri in December 2004, but the reason I'm making this video now, and the reason it's relevant now, is because Montgomery is due for execution. She was supposed to be executed in December of 2020, but there was a delay and she's due to be executed on the 12th of January. I'm a consultant forensic psychiatrist, so this is exactly the kind of case that I'm asked to assess and to give evidence for as an expert witness in criminal court. So in this video, I'll tell you a bit of background about the case, especially the horrific aforementioned background of Lisa Montgomery. I'm going to give you my USP, which is my expertise and my perspective about the medico-legal issues of this trial. So that would include the diagnoses that Montgomery had of mental illness and what they mean. And also I'll tell you a bit about the controversy to do with the evidence. So apparently no indication of mental illness or of the trauma that Lisa Montgomery faced was even disclosed to the jury until the appeal stage of the trial, which is just crazy. The other reason that this trial or this case is so unusual is that Lisa Montgomery is only one of 55 women on death row in the States right now. And if she is executed on the 12th, so if there's no successful appeal before then she'll be the first woman in the States to be executed in 70 years. So let me start by telling you a little bit about Montgomery's horrible, horrible background. So as a forensic psychiatrist, I see a lot of cases and abuse is very common, sadly, amongst my patient cohort. But I have to say this case tops it. It was beyond anything that I'd heard of before. So apparently Montgomery's father sexually abused her on a regular basis since she was 11 years old, and her mother knew about it and even witnessed it. And both parents physically chastised Montgomery and her siblings. They would hit them with belts. On one occasion, the mother even reportedly killed their dog in front of the children intentionally with a shovel as a form of punishment. So just really shocking stuff. Also, the mother married a total of 6 times, and she reportedly prostituted Montgomery to these men since Montgomery was a young teen. So just really disgusting, disturbing stuff. On top of all of that, she was isolated because they lived in a remote trailer in the middle of nowhere. She was neglected, so she would turn up to school with holes in her clothes. So it looks like literally every single possible form of abuse occurred, from physical to sexual to neglect to emotional. Before I carry on, I just want to properly introduce myself. So as I said, my name's Dr. 𝐏𝐬𝐲𝐡, consultant forensic psychiatrist and expert witness to criminal courts. This is A Psych for Sore Minds. I release videos on a range of mental health topics, some to do with offending and violence and crime like this one, some completely unrelated. My USP, I think, is that I actually talk about my real life cases. I haven't in this video, but in the longer ones I do. I have new videos out every Tuesday and every Friday. Generally, the Tuesday ones tend to be long and detailed when I talk about my cases, whereas the Friday ones are like a brief overview of one specific topic. But you have to subscribe, otherwise you're going to miss out, and we just cannot have that. So I wanted to tell you a bit about the diagnoses, because this is my area of expertise as a psychiatrist. So Montgomery was given lots of different diagnoses, including depression, borderline personality disorder, complex PTSD, and dissociative disorder. So I'm going to do a quick deep dive in all those diagnoses for you. So let me tell you a bit about the diagnoses. I don't have time to go into all of them in detail because this video would just be really long, but I'm going to give you a brief summary of each of them. So let's start with complex PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. So post-traumatic stress disorder follows for some people after a massive traumatic event, and the core symptoms are reliving that trauma, which is basically like nightmares or flashbacks, hypervigilance, which is a constant state of anxiety, including emotional numbness, and also avoidance behavior. So the sufferer goes out of their way to avoid triggers of that trauma. Complex PTSD happens when it's repeated trauma from a really young age, as is the case of Montgomery. And it's the same symptoms of PTSD plus some extra symptoms, which are emotional dysregulation, so an inability to control their emotions, which might include like explosive anger, and also a problem with self-perception, like not having an idea of who you are, who your identity is. Then there's dissociative disorder, which is associated with like a general sense of detachment from everything around you. So that affects emotions, thoughts, feelings, memories. Two common forms of it would be depersonalization, which is the belief that you're not real, or derealization, which is the belief that everything around you is not real. It's not to be confused with dissociative identity disorders, which is multiple personalities, which is just a whole different messy kettle of fish. Then there's depression. Well, that's pretty straightforward. I think most of you will know what depression is. Clinical depression is more than just low mood. It's also associated with like a lack of energy, lack of motivation, making the sufferer want to lie in bed all day, for example, and also like a lack of pleasure or a lack of enjoyment from activities known as anhedonia. And then there's borderline personality disorder, also known as emotionally unstable personality disorder, which is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. So sufferers can't control their emotions, they become very easily upset, they're unstable, they can't tolerate distress, they can act really impulsively, and they have a tendency towards self-destruction, including actual physical deliberate self-harm. I've got a video on personality disorders somewhere on the channel. Check it out. But out of all the diagnoses, the one I haven't mentioned yet, and by far the most fascinating one, is pseudosciasis. This is a false belief that one is pregnant when they're not. And this is the case with Lisa Montgomery. So she believed she was pregnant, and it appears that she killed and stole the unborn baby of another woman to pretend it was hers. So it's very kind of messed up psychology behind it all. And what's amazing about this disorder is it can actually come with physical symptoms of pregnancy. So some women stop having periods, some women lactate, sometimes you even get like abdominal distension. And it's not fully understood, but as far as we know, what happens is that due to the psychological belief of being pregnant, the body actually releases hormones. However, I should say that this diagnosis was strongly refuted by the forensic psychiatrist on the opposition of the prosecution. So very, very briefly, forensic psychiatrists like myself act as expert witnesses. So if the defense thinks there's a mental illness that might influence the defendant's behavior, then the defense team, the attorney, will instruct a forensic psychiatrist to do an assessment, write a court report, possibly give evidence in the witness stand. And if the opposition, the prosecution, which in the UK would be the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service, if they agree, then that's the end of the matter. And if they disagree, then they instruct their own forensic psychiatrist, and the two psychiatrists give evidence and battle it out in the court, which I've done many times, and I've given evidence for both sides to try and keep kind of balanced in my career. What I find alarming about this case was that even though those diagnoses were made by the experts, although, as I said, false pregnancy was refuted, this evidence didn't actually make its way to the jury during the trial. And as far as I can tell, that's because of the alleged incompetency of the defense attorney, or what we would call a barrister in the UK. So the jury didn't have this. The jury found Montgomery guilty, and they made the decision to give her the death penalty. So it's quite an extreme case, obviously. And it was only at appeal that the evidence about her previous trauma and her diagnosed mental illness actually came out, but obviously it didn't change the outcome. Now, I haven't given evidence in an American case, but that would not happen in the UK. The defense team would be very aware if there's psychiatric issues and would go out of their way to get evidence from a forensic psychiatrist. So I have little knowledge or expertise around mental illness and its relation to the death penalty, because obviously we don't have the death penalty in the UK. I'm saying this out loud for the benefit of our American cousins. I did a little bit of research, and I was quite alarmed to find out that the patient having a mental illness isn't in itself an exclusion factor for somebody to be executed. It's taken on a case-to-case basis, although there are a lot of people campaigning against this, including the American Psychiatrists Association. So that's enough from me. I have some questions for you, and I'd be very grateful if you can give me the answers in the comment sections below. My questions are, firstly, do you believe in the death penalty? Secondly, do you think that there's any difference or any exceptions that should be made in a case like this, where the perpetrator has such a horrific history of trauma? And lastly, do you think there should be some sort of relationship or correlation between mental illness and the death penalty, i.e. people who are floridly unwell either at the time of the offence or currently after they've been in death row, if they're due for execution? Do you think that makes it fair? So I'd love to know what you think. Jump in and I will tell you my views as well. I'd love to have a chat. So until next time, subscribe to my channel and don't forget, stay euthymic, and please remember, I love you.